Listen, because this is the part they never tell you. The part that makes your throat go tight for no reason, like your body heard the truth before your mind could defend itself. Imagine you're standing 50 yards away from your own life, and you realize the man you built is holding a baby that isn't yours. He's wearing the sweater you bought him. He's smiling the smile you paid for. And the woman beside him, young, bright, replaceable, leans in like she belongs there. No shouting. No scandal. Just a quiet scene in a public park that feels like a ritual. Like an initiation. Like you were invited to witness something you were never meant to see. Most men think betrayal is emotional. That it's about sex, about love, about humiliation. That's what they want you to think. Because if you believe betrayal is just a wound, you'll treat it like a wound. You'll bleed in public. You'll scream, you'll beg, you'll bargain. You'll become entertainment. A cautionary clip. A crazy spouse story people repeat over whiskey. And meanwhile, the real machine keeps moving behind you, silent, efficient, corporate, legal. That's where power lives. Not in feelings. In structures. In paperwork. In the quiet language that decides who owns what when the lights go out. Her name was Eleanor Sterling Thorne, but the world didn't call her that. The world called her Declan Thorne's wife, as if she was an accessory with good posture. Declan was the public face of a logistics empire worth billions, a predator in tailored suits, the kind of man who speaks in certainty so other men mistake it for truth. He had investors, press, politicians. He had the aura. The throne. But thrones aren't built out of aura. They're built out of foundation. And the foundation is invisible by design. That afternoon, Eleanor didn't walk toward the bench. She didn't confront. She didn't grant him the privilege of seeing her break. She did something colder, something higher. She watched. She documented. She took the kind of evidence that doesn't argue, doesn't plead, doesn't need emotion to be believed. Then she turned around and walked away because the moment you're seen, you're predictable. And predictable men are controllable. In her car, the silence wasn't grief. It was a recalculation. She made one call to a man who doesn't handle divorces, he handles corporate funerals. And when he answered, she didn't use her married name. She used her real one. Pull the 1998 file, she said. The one nobody touches. That's when the story stopped being about a husband and a mistress, and became what it always was, ownership. Control. And the ancient truth hiding in plain sight, if you don't hold the leverage, you don't hold the marriage. You're just renting a role. That night, Declan came home wearing confidence like armor, dripping rain from a city he never visited. He announced Chicago the way liars announce weather, casually, like it's too ordinary to question. He kissed the top of Eleanor's head with practiced tenderness, the kind that feels affectionate until you realize it's a stamp. A mark of possession. He sat at the table she designed in the house she drew with her own hands, and he talked about the company like a god describing creation. 12-hour boardroom battles. Grueling negotiations. The myth of the indispensable man. Eleanor listened the way a surgeon listens to a heartbeat. Calm. Exactly. Not because she believed him, but because she needed him to believe himself. Here's the first hidden system you're not taught. Narratives are control structures. Whoever tells the story first owns the emotional framing. If Eleanor confronted him in the park, she'd become the hysterical wife. If she cried at dinner, she'd become an unstable spouse. Declan would weaponize her pain, convert it into a settlement, and vanish into a new life financed by money he claimed was his. He poured himself wine from her cellar like nothing was wrong. And then, because arrogance always leaks, he mentioned Tiffany Blair. The junior VP. Bright future, he said. Might need late nights at the office to review numbers with her. He said it like a manager discussing workload. Like a man forgetting the difference between private sin and public strategy. Eleanor nodded. She even smiled. Because men like Declan don't fear anger. They fear competence. Anger is messy and emotional. Competence is a guillotine that doesn't need to hate you to end you. When Declan went upstairs to shower, Eleanor didn't collapse. She didn't stare at the ceiling wondering why she wasn't enough. She moved. Quietly. Directly. Into his office. You think cheating is a crime. That's what movies sell you. But the darker history, the one buried in every rich marriage, every empire, every perfect couple photo, is that infidelity is usually just a distraction. The real betrayal is financial. It's the extraction. It's the slow siphon of resources so that when the personal collapse happens, the victim discovers the vault is already empty. Eleanor logged into his computer because she already knew his passwords. Narcissists always think the world is built around them, so they build security around their own name. And there it was, a folder, cleanly labeled like a confession for anyone intelligent enough to look. Project Nest Egg. Bank transfers. Offshore pathways. A holding company. And a beneficiary that made Eleanor's stomach go cold not from surprise, but from confirmation. TB Holdings. Tiffany Blair. He wasn't just betraying her. He was preparing to erase her. Then she found the draft agreement, sterile, clinical, written like a mercy offer. The house. A stipend. A lump sum. And a line that mattered more than all the romantic vows ever spoken. She waives rights to Thorn Global shares. $2 million for a $4 billion empire. A number designed to sound generous to normal people, while quietly stealing a lifetime from the woman who built the foundation. That's the second system. Institutional manipulation doesn't arrive with a gun. It arrives with paper. With polite language. With standard stuff. With signatures placed at the end of fatigue. Eleanor printed it. Deleted the log. Put everything back exactly as it was. Then she returned to the dining room just as Declan walked back downstairs, cleaned up, relaxed, because he thought the only danger was emotion. He sat across from her and smiled like a man who thinks he's invisible. And Eleanor realized something that changes a person forever once they see it. The most dangerous predators don't attack you. They convince you it's your job to make their life easier while they dismantle yours. The next move wasn't rage. It was camouflage. Eleanor became softer on purpose. Agreeable. Predictable. The kind of wife powerful men prefer because she doesn't interrupt the mythology. Declan mistook her silence for surrender the way every entitled man mistakes restraint for weakness. He started speaking to her like she was already gone, like a piece of furniture he planned to keep in the divorce because it matched the house. And then he set the trap. He came at her with a thick envelope and the tone of false boredom. Just sign these, he said. Refinancing. Formalities. Lawyer nonsense. He placed the papers down like a father giving homework to a child. Then he handed her the pen like it was a gift. But Eleanor could feel the pressure under it, the quiet insistence. The urgency disguised as convenience. The sweat of a man trying to lock a door before someone realizes there's a fire in the building. This is how psychological control works when it wears a suit. It doesn't force you. It rushes you. It overwhelms you. It makes you tired. It makes you feel stupid for reading. It makes you feel difficult to ask questions. It frames your caution as a flaw, your intelligence as distrust, your boundaries as betrayal. Declan wasn't just cheating. He was doing what institutions do to people every day, reducing your agency by flooding you with complexity, then demanding your compliance at the end. Sign here. Initial here. Don't worry about your pretty head. Let the experts handle it. Eleanor put on her glasses and scanned the pages the way a hunter scans tracks. Buried deep, where most eyes glaze over, was the real weapon, a clause that would convert her voting shares into non-voting shares. Not taking her wealth, just stripping her power. That's always the play. Let you keep enough comfort to stay quiet. Remove your ability to change the outcome. Declan leaned in. I already read it twice, he said, as if his reading was protection for her. As if his understanding could substitute for her consent. Eleanor held the pen above the line and asked the question that made him freeze. Do you love me, Declan? He blinked, annoyed, because love questions are inconvenient when you're executing a takeover. Of course, he said. What kind of question is that? A perfect answer from a man who thinks love is a word you deploy to end a conversation. He pushed the papers closer. Sign. And Eleanor did something that looks small until you understand power. She controlled the details. She signed, but not the way he expected. Not the way he could use it. She signed with her maiden initial. A tiny shift. A subtle fracture in his certainty. And the real blade wasn't even the initial, it was what he forgot. Corporate bylaws. Witness requirements. Board oversight. The boring architecture of institutions that men like Declan ignore because they think charisma overrides law. Without a witness, his document wasn't a lock. It was evidence. Evidence that he attempted fraud in his own living room. He didn't check. He didn't read the signature. He was too relieved. He kissed her cheek with cold lips and told her to enjoy Napa. Told her to relax. Told her not to check the news. That line, "Don't check the news," is the third system. When someone is about to set off a bomb in your life, they try to blindfold you first. They call it rest. They call it self-care. They call it a break. But what it is isolation. They want you alone and uninformed when the public story drops, so your first reaction is panic instead of strategy. Eleanor watched him wave from the porch as the car pulled away, the perfect husband in the perfect house. And as soon as he disappeared behind the corner, she gave the driver a new destination. 4 Seasons. Then Bellevue. War doesn't begin with explosions. It begins with a quiet reroute. And in her bag, she carried something almost insulting in its simplicity, a cheap pacifier from a drugstore, wrapped like a message from the underworld. Not for the baby, for the mistress. Bring him to the gala. Because Eleanor understood the oldest rule of public power, you don't destroy a king in private. You destroy him where his crown matters. By the time the gala arrived, the city felt like it was holding its breath. Not because anyone knew what was coming, because they didn't. That's the point. The most decisive moves are invisible until they're irreversible. Declan walked into the ballroom wearing a bespoke tuxedo and the smug glow of a man who believes the game is already won. He believed he'd neutralized his wife with paperwork and distraction. He believed he'd positioned his mistress as the future with a seating chart and a few well-placed smiles. He believed the board belonged to him because he trained them to associate his voice with authority. He didn't understand he was standing inside a structure Eleanor had designed years before, when nobody was watching. Back when the company was a garage dream and she was still helping in the shadows. Back when she wrote protections into the foundation because she knew one day, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, a man would try to turn her contribution into a footnote. The ballroom shimmered with money and status. Crystal chandeliers. Gold leaf. Soft jazz that existed only to make predators feel civilized. Men in tailored suits traded lies they called forecasts. Politicians laughed like they weren't for sale. Cameras flashed for the senator, the kind of man who smiles best when he's being investigated. And at the head table, Tiffany sat where Eleanor was supposed to sit. Tiffany wore blue silk like armor, but it didn't fit right. Her eyes kept drifting to doors, to corners, to shadows. Because deep down, even the ambitious know when they've stepped into a room that can end them. Declan leaned toward her and whispered like a mentor to a recruit, "Relax. The papers are signed. We've won." That's how institutions recruit accomplices. They don't say, "Help me betray someone." They say, "We've already won." They make you feel late to the truth, pressured to align with the new reality. It's psychological gravity. If victory is inevitable, resistance feels foolish. If the queen is gone, you might as well sit in her chair. Then Tiffany told him about the package. A pacifier. A note. Bring Leo to the gala. Declan froze, not because he feared scandal, but because he feared exposure on a timeline he didn't control. He hissed at her, low and vicious. "Did you bring him?" Tiffany admitted the baby was upstairs, hidden, waiting like contraband. Declan swallowed panic and tried to resume the performance. He guided her to smile at the senator. He tried to block the cameras. He tried to hold the narrative together with his hands. And then the room went silent. Not polite silence. Not dinner silence. A vacuum silence. The kind that moves like a wave when something primordial steps into the room and everyone feels it before they understand it. At the entrance stood Eleanor. Not in Napa. Not absent. Not removed. She was framed in the doorway like a verdict. Her gown was deep red, blood red, not romantic red. The color wasn't style. It was a message. She moved down the aisle slowly, not because she wanted attention, but because she owned it. Her posture didn't ask permission. Her gaze didn't search for approval. She walked like a woman who had already made the decision and was simply arriving to execute it. Declan's fork clattered. The chairman leaned toward him, confused, betrayed by his own assumptions. "I thought you said she was in Napa." Declan couldn't answer because lies collapse when truth becomes physical. Eleanor reached the head table and placed a red folder in front of him. Not a gift. A burial. Declan's smile twitched into place, forced and brittle. "What a surprise," he said, "the way men speak when they're drowning and still pretending to host the party." Eleanor looked at Tiffany with something worse than anger, precision. She didn't argue about the seat. She didn't plead for respect. She spoke like an owner correcting a temporary employee. "Stay," she said, almost kindly. "I wouldn't want to separate you from the senator. I'll take the podium." Opening remarks weren't on the schedule. Declan protested because he believed schedules were law. Eleanor leaned in just enough for him to hear it as a private execution. "I'm the majority shareholder, Declan. I am on schedule." Then she stepped away from the table and toward the stage, and every man in that room felt a shift in the air. Because they recognized it, even if they'd never say it out loud. They weren't watching a marriage break. They were watching a throne change hands. Eleanor stood behind the microphone like it belonged to her because it did. The room watched, phones half-raised, instincts buzzing. They expected tears. They expected a messy reveal. That's the script people are trained to recognize: betrayal, breakdown, humiliation. But Eleanor didn't give them that. She gave them something far more unsettling. She gave them the truth in the language institutions respect. Her voice was calm, not soft. Measured, not emotional. The kind of voice you hear right before a court ruling. "Good evening," she said, and the room leaned forward, because power doesn't need volume. It needs certainty. She introduced herself with her full name, not the decorative version people used at dinner parties. And then she did the first forbidden thing a supporting wife is never supposed to do in public. She redefined the story. "For 15 years, she said, I have allowed my husband to stand in the spotlight." The word allowed to hit the room like a slap. Men don't like hearing that their kings were permitted to rule. It implies an invisible hand. An architecture behind the face. She continued, talking about partnership, about trust, about integrity, and as she spoke, the screen behind her flickered. The Thorn Global logo vanished. In its place appeared a yellowed document dated 1998. Articles of Incorporation. 2 names. Declan Thorne and Eleanor Sterling. Murmurs spread, small at first, then growing, because every man in that ballroom had been living inside a myth. The myth said Declan built it. The myth said Eleanor hosted and smiled. The myth said the empire came from masculine force, not quiet design. Eleanor let them stare until the truth settled into their bodies. Then she shifted the screen again. Spreadsheets. Traces transfers. A forensic map of money flowing out of R&D out of the company's future into a shell company named with a kind of sick tenderness, Little Leo LLC. She didn't accuse me with emotion. She complained with numbers. In the last 6 months, she said, $3 million has been siphoned from research and development. Gasps now. The chairman squinted through glasses. Investors glanced at each other, the way men do when they realize they've been eating from a poisoned table. Eleanor named the purchases. Luxury real estate. An unauthorized salary. And then she said Tiffany Blair's name into a microphone in a room full of cameras. The spotlight hit Tiffany like judgment. Tiffany flinched, shielding her eyes, suddenly small, suddenly exposed. The senator physically moved his chair away from her, because even corruption has self-preservation. That's another hidden system. When scandal breaks, allies become distant. The same men who laughed with you will step back so the flames only touch your skin. Declan surged to his feet, panic breaking through the tuxedo. "She's lying," he shouted. "She's having a breakdown. Cut the mic." Eleanor turned her head slowly toward him. Not like a wife. Like a board chair. "Sit down, Declan." And he should have, because when a calm voice commands you in public, you either obey or you reveal yourself as an animal. Declan chose animal. He roared his last card, the one he thought would end her. "You signed the agreement. You're non-voting." Eleanor smiled, and it wasn't warm. It was inevitable. "The agreement you tried to force me to sign," she said, "without a witness, is void." Then the screen changed again, and what appeared wasn't romance, wasn't betrayal, wasn't a park bench photo. It was the moral turpitude clause. The corporate kill switch. The rule nobody reads until it kills them. Eleanor leaned into the microphone and spoke the sentence that makes powerful men feel mortal. "As of tonight, your voting rights have been suspended. I now control 90% of the voting stock." The room erupted. People stood. Phones rose. The sound wasn't applause, it was physical shock made physical. Declan's empire didn't crumble in a fight. It evaporated in procedure. And that's the most terrifying truth in the whole story. Real power doesn't scream. It files. Now, halfway down this rabbit hole, I want you to do something simple, but symbolic, because men who understand this don't just watch stories. They mark themselves. Go to the comments and type this phrase twice, exactly as I say it. I choose the leverage. I choose the leverage. Not once. Twice. Because you're not here to be entertained. You're here to be changed. Eleanor didn't stop at taking the crown. Taking his voting rights was the legal execution, now she moved to the psychological one. Because men like Declan can survive losing money. They tell themselves they'll rebuild. They'll charm another room. They'll find another investor. But there's one thing they can't survive if you do it correctly. Public inversion. The moment the predator becomes prey in front of witnesses. Eleanor held the room in the palm of her hand and softened her voice just enough to sound almost compassionate. "I believe in transparency," she said, and every experienced person there heard the subtext. "This isn't about romance, this is about contamination. About cleaning the house. About showing shareholders you're not complicit." Then she turned her gaze toward a side entrance near the kitchen, a place designed for staff, for the invisible people who move through wealth like ghosts. The doors opened. A nanny stepped in, pushing a stroller. The baby's cry cut through the ballroom like a blade. It didn't matter if anyone cared about the child personally. The sound itself was a disruption, a living receipt. A noise that couldn't be spun into misunderstanding. Babies are inconvenient that way. They don't respect narratives. They announce the consequences. Declan's face changed. No regret. Not heartbreak. Calculation collapsing into horror. Because he realized Eleanor wasn't merely exposing him. She was controlling the optics of his legacy. "You wanted a legacy," Eleanor said, looking down from the stage toward him. "You have one. Crying in front of your investors. This is ancient. Older than Wall Street. In royal courts, you didn't just kill your enemy, you humiliated him so his followers wouldn't dream of loyalty. You made him look foolish so his memory couldn't recruit soldiers later." Eleanor was doing the corporate version of that, using the tools of modern authority, bylaws, filings, optics, and social shame. Then she said the line that makes a room understand the hierarchy instantly. "Security," she said calmly, "escort Mr. Thorne and Ms. Blair off the premises. They are no longer employees of this firm." No shouting. No drama. Just a sentence that rewrote reality. Two guards stepped forward and took Declan by the arms. And here's the part most men don't think about until it's too late. When the institution stops recognizing you, your body becomes movable. Your status becomes removable. You can be physically relocated like a problem they've solved before. Declan twisted, trying to speak, to plead, to threaten. "You planned this," he rasped, eyes locked on Eleanor like she was a stranger wearing his wife's face. Eleanor lifted a champagne flute from a passing tray because she understood symbols better than he ever did. "No, Declan," she said. "I developed the strategy. You executed the plan." That sentence is poison to narcissists. It reframes his actions as her design. It turns his betrayal into her weapon. It makes him feel used by the very person he tried to use. The doors slammed behind him. Tiffany stumbled after the stroller, sobbing, clutching her purse like it could anchor her to the life she thought she'd purchased. The room went silent again, but this time it wasn't shocking. It was recognition. Then, slowly, the chairman stood and began to clap. One person, then another, then the whole ballroom, rising to their feet not because they loved Eleanor, but because they feared her competence and respected the clean violence of what they'd just witnessed. Applause is often just a crowd admitting they've chosen the new winner. Eleanor didn't bow. She didn't smile. She sipped champagne like it was medicine. Outside, cameras devoured the scene. Headlines began writing themselves. Not wife scorned, but corporate coup, embezzlement scandal, CEO ousted. Declan's public identity builder, visionary, king was replaced in real time with a new identity, liability. And that's another suppressed truth hidden in plain sight. Society forgives betrayal more easily than it forgives incompetence. Cheating is messy. Embezzlement is unforgivable because it reveals you're not a leader, just a thief with a title. By midnight, the filing was already in the system. By morning, lawyers would swarm. Regulators would sniff blood. And the myth of Declan Thorne, the myth he lived inside, would be gone. Eleanor returned to her suite alone. Not lonely. Alone like a man after he's won a war and realizes the person he used to be is dead. 6 months later, Declan sat in a visitation room that smelled like disinfectant and defeated ambition. The kind of room where time moves slowly on purpose, so you feel every minute you wasted believing you were untouchable. The cashmere was gone. The tailored confidence was gone. What remained was a man learning the most humiliating lesson of modern power. Institutions don't hate you. They simply stop needing you. When the door buzzed, Declan straightened, expecting a public defender. Instead, Eleanor walked in wearing a white trench coat like she'd stepped out of the weather and into judgment. She didn't rush to the chair. She didn't soften. She didn't perform closure for him. She stood, placed a thin envelope on the counter, and looked at him the way you look at a fire you already put out. Declan's eyes lit up with that desperate kind of hope narcissists mistake for love. "You came," he said. "I knew you would. You still care." That's the last spell men like him try to cast, emotional leverage when structural leverage is gone. They want you to remember the good years, the inside jokes, the vacations, the nights you built something together. They want you to believe the past is a debt you owe them in the present. Eleanor didn't blink. "I'm not here to reminisce," she said. "I'm here to close the loop." Declan leaned forward, voice cracking. "You have to stop this. They've been talking for 10 years. I'm not a criminal." Eleanor corrected him with a calm that felt surgical. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft." He flared, because even in a cage, ego looks for oxygen. "I built it too. I was the face. And while you were the face," Eleanor said, "I was writing the code." That line didn't just insult him. It rewrote his identity. It told him that the thing he worshipped, his image, was a mask someone else carved. Men can survive pain. They don't survive being reduced. Eleanor slid the envelope closer. A plea agreement. 2 years minimum security, probation, full liquidation of personal assets to repay shareholders. Not mercy, containment. A controlled burn so the company could recover. Declan scoffed, but it was hollow. "And leave me with nothing?" Eleanor's voice stayed level. "You're already at nothing. Your accounts are frozen. Your reputation is ash." Then she delivered the final cut, quiet and precise. Tiffany had already cooperated. She'd turned state's witness. She'd done what she needed to survive. Declan's face drained, because the betrayal from Tiffany hurt him more than the destruction of his marriage. That's how these men are wired. They don't mourn the person they wronged, they mourn the person who stopped being useful. He swallowed, smaller now. "If I sign, what happens to the company?" Eleanor let him sit in that question long enough to feel the weight of what he truly lost. Then she answered. "It's thriving," she said. "We rebranded." Declan frowned, confused. Rebranded to what? Eleanor's eyes didn't glow with revenge. They were too clear for that. Sterling Logistics. Her maiden name. Her true name. The name she buried for 15 years so a man could feel like a king. Declan looked like he'd been punched without contact. Because that's the most brutal reality, she didn't just remove him. She replaced him with herself. She didn't burn the empire down. She took it back and corrected the label. At the door, he tried one last plea. What about us? 15 years. Doesn't that mean anything? Eleanor paused, hand on the handle. For a moment, her voice softened not into forgiveness, but into finality. It meant everything to me, she said. That's why it had to end this way. I loved you enough to build an empire for you. And you respected me so little you thought you could steal it from under my nose. Then she left. Declan finally got what he'd been ordering for years. Every time he said don't worry about it, every time he dismissed her questions, every time he treated her mind like decoration. Silence. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of consequence. A week after the plea deal was filed, Tiffany sat in a coffee shop near Pike Place, feeding Leo mashed peas with hands that shook just enough to betray what her smile tried to hide. The designer wardrobe was gone. The corporate posture was gone. When you're stripped of status, your body changes first, shoulders fold inward, voice drops, eyes scan for exits. She looked like a woman who'd survived a storm by clinging to a piece of wreckage, and now had to pretend it was a boat. She flinched when a shadow fell over her table. Not a reporter. Not a process server. Benedict Cole. He didn't sit. He didn't make small talk. He placed a thick document bound in blue paper on the table, and Tiffany's face tightened like she was bracing for impact. Is she suing me? She whispered. I don't have anything. Declan took everything. Benedict shook his head once, almost bored by the obviousness of Tiffany's fear. She's not suing you. Tiffany stared at the document like it might explode. Then what is it? A trust deed, he said. The words didn't land at first. Tiffany blinked, confused, then suspicious. A trust, for who? Benedict nodded toward the baby, who smeared peas across the table like the world was still safe. For him. Tiffany's mouth fell open. Tears came fast, not graceful, hot, humiliating, uncontrollable. Why? She choked. I helped destroy her marriage. I hated her. Benedict's voice stayed flat, but there was something underneath it, a grudging respect. Eleanor operates on a different level. She knows the boy is innocent. She didn't want the sins of the father to starve the son. Here's the darker truth people miss because they're addicted to revenge fantasies. Real power doesn't need cruelty to prove it exists. Cruelty is what men do when they're insecure. Power is what a disciplined mind does when it can afford to think long-term. Eleanor didn't build that trust out of softness. She built it out of dominance because she refused to let Declan's bloodline become a future weapon against her company, her legacy, her name. She neutralized the threat and rewrote the story. The child would not grow up as a symbol of scandal. He would grow up as a man with options. A man who could become better than the father who tried to buy the world with stolen money. Benedict stood, ready to leave, like the transaction was complete. But he paused and added the final message Eleanor wanted delivered not as kindness, but as a lesson carved into Tiffany's memory. She said, next time, check the wife's maiden name before you try to take her throne. Benedict walked out, leaving Tiffany staring at the trust deed like it was a mercy she didn't deserve and a warning she could never forget. And that's where the story turns from personal drama into mythic dark history, the kind that repeats across centuries with different costumes. Because what happened here wasn't just infidelity. It was an attempted transfer of power using seduction as camouflage. Tiffany wasn't merely the mistress. She was the tool, the distraction, the smiling face used to help Declan move assets and rewrite control. That's the oldest institutional technique on Earth. Give the public a scandal so they won't look for the theft. Keep them arguing about morality while you move the gold. But Eleanor didn't argue morality. She argued ownership. She didn't fight in the emotional arena where men like Declan are practiced predators. She dragged him into the structural arena where charisma means nothing and documentation is a blade. And in doing so, she revealed something dangerous for anyone watching. You can be loved and still be targeted. You can be married and still be audited. You can share a bed with a person who secretly views you as a position to be replaced. If you're hearing this and feeling that cold awareness in your chest, good. That's the awakening part. The part that doesn't feel nice. The part that makes you harder to manipulate. Because the lesson isn't don't trust. The lesson is trust, but verify your leverage. Now look at this the way men who survive look at it, not as gossip, not as romance, but as a blueprint of control. Declan didn't just cheat because he fell in love. He cheated because he believed he could run two systems at once, a public marriage that stabilized his reputation and a private replacement that fed his ego. He wanted the wife as infrastructure and the mistress as entertainment. That's not passion. That's consumption. And he assumed Eleanor would respond like a normal person responds, emotion first, strategy second. He assumed she'd want answers, closure, and an apology. He assumed she'd fight him in the arena where he was strongest, charm, narrative, social perception. Because that's what the world trains you to do. To act from pain. To seek fairness from people who don't believe in fairness. But Eleanor's mind went somewhere else entirely, the architecture underneath the emotions. Who owns the shares? Who controls the vote? What clauses exist for executive misconduct? What signatures are valid? Which actions can be proven? And what can be done publicly, where witnesses turn private truth into irreversible reality? That is the forbidden history piece most people never study. Power has always worked like this. Empires don't fall because a king feels bad. They fall because the structure underneath him changes hands. Courts, councils, trusts, clergy, banks, different eras, same machine. The public sees the theatre. The insiders move paper. Declan thought he was the brain of the business. Eleanor understood something colder. In every institution, the real brain is the one who wrote the rules when nobody was paying attention. The one who set the conditions. The one who built the fail-safes. The one who can press a clause and end a career without raising a voice. And if you want the darkest part, here it is. Declan's final mistake wasn't cheating. It wasn't even embezzling. It was underestimating the quiet person next to him, the one he assumed existed to stabilize his image. He treated Eleanor like an accessory, and accessories don't get consulted. But that's exactly why they're dangerous when they're actually architects. Because the moment they stop playing their role, you discover you were never the operator. You were the performer. By the time the public saw wife takes company, the real war had already been won in private, evidence gathered, filings prepared, trust documents pulled, leverage aligned, optics arranged. The gala wasn't the battlefield. It was the execution. There's a reason that hits men so hard. A lot of guys watching this aren't just watching Declan's downfall. They're watching a fear they don't name, the fear of thinking you're in control because you earn money, because you're loud, because you're respected, and then finding out someone else has been quietly holding the kill switch the entire time. So here's what you take from this, not as paranoia, but as mastery. First, if someone wants you isolated, uninformed, relaxed, right before a major decision, you're being positioned. That's not care. That's containment. Second, if the people around you only value your emotions, they'll try to provoke them. Because emotional men are steerable men. The person who can stay cold when it matters controls the room. Third, the public story is never the whole story. The scandal is the smoke. The move is the money. The drama is what they feed you so you don't look at the structure. And finally, never confuse being the face with being the owner. Being the face makes you replaceable. Being the owner makes you inevitable. Eleanor didn't win because she was hurt. She won because she refused to let hurt choose her actions. She treated betrayal like an intelligence briefing, not a tragedy. She didn't ask why he did it. She asked what he'd already moved, who he'd already paid, and which rules could end him cleanly. That's why this story sticks. It's not just satisfying. It's instructional. It tells you the world you live in is ruled by quiet clauses and unseen leverage, and the man who ignores that is volunteering to be controlled. One more thing before we go to the end. If you commented the phrase earlier, keep it there. That wasn't engagement. That was a marker. A decision. Because men who learn this once don't go back to sleep the same way. The final image isn't Declan in a courtroom or Tiffany in a coffee shop. The final image is Eleanor standing on the observation deck of a tower that now bears her real name, watching ships cut across the water like dark signatures moving exactly where she told them to go. The rain has cleared. The horizon is clean. Behind her, a boardroom waits, new directors, new rules, new blood. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because power never rests. It consolidates. It evolves. It removes rot before it collapses. Benedict steps beside her with the update like a priest delivering a verdict. The vote is unanimous. Expansion approved. Stock up. Press moving on to the next scandal. And the world, hungry and forgetful, has already started turning her coup into a meme, a headline, a morality tale. But you and I aren't here for the headline. We're here for the mechanism. Because what happened to Declan is what happens to men who believe the world is run on charisma. It isn't. Charisma is a spotlight. Structures are the stage. If you don't own the stage, someone can switch off the light and you're just a man standing in the dark, still smiling, still talking while nobody listens. Eleanor turns from the glass and walks into that boardroom, heels clicking like punctuation. Not triumphant. Controlled. Because she knows the next truth the public never learns: taking power is loud. Keeping it is quiet. It's a compliance team. It's an audit. It's policies. It's removing the exact conditions that allowed a Declan to exist. And somewhere in a minimum security facility, Declan sits with the silence he earned. Not just the silence of a ruined marriage, but the silence of being irrelevant. No assistance. No board votes. No calls returned. Just time. A man who once believed he was the engine discovering he was always replaceable, and the machine runs cleaner without him. Tiffany, meanwhile, lives small. Not glamorous. Not celebrated. But real. And Leo, Declan's legacy, Eleanor's unwilling exhibit, now has a trust that will pay for a future he didn't ask for and didn't deserve to lose. That trust is not forgiveness. It's containment. It's Eleanor making sure the boy doesn't grow into a resentful weapon pointed back at her world. It's strategic mercy, the kind that feels unsettling because it doesn't match the revenge fantasies people crave. Now listen carefully, because this is where the story stops being hers and starts being yours. There are men watching this who are being lied to right now, not by strangers, but by people in their own house, their own company, their own circle. Not always with affairs. Sometimes with standard paperwork. Sometimes with just trust me. Sometimes with you don't need to worry about that. And the danger isn't the lie itself. The danger is the assumption behind it, that you won't check. That you won't read. That you won't understand your own leverage. This is what hidden forces look like in the modern world. Not hooded cults. Not movie conspiracies. It's institutional language used as hypnosis. Its urgency is used as a weapon. Its complexity is used to exhaust you into compliance. It's people smiling while they position you. It's a signature line waiting for your fatigue. So take this as your final instruction, mentor to student, man to man. Don't be the face of your own life while someone else holds the shares. Know what you own. Know what you signed. Know who benefits if you're distracted. And if you ever feel that cold moment, like you've seen something you weren't meant to see, don't explode. Don't beg. Step back. Get evidence. Find the clause. Build the leverage. Then move in public, where reality can't be rewritten. Because the men who rule don't win by being louder. They win by being harder to manipulate.